See, a lease of building will necessarily include a lease of land. Without land, there cannot be any building, isn't it? It's very natural. So whenever you are leasing out a building or a part of a building, let us say an office premise in a building, or maybe the entire building, whatever are the lease payments will be towards building. The lease payment shall also be towards land. A lease of building, remember this, a lease of building will always include a lease of land. So the lease payments that a lessor is charging, it is towards the building as well as towards the land. So a question arises that whether this segregation of the lease payments of how much for building and how much for land is necessary. This is especially necessary for a lessor, because a lessor is supposed to classify the lease into finance lease, operating lease. A lease of land will not turn out to be a finance lease. It can never become a finance lease because land has unlimited useful economic life. Land was there before us, land will be there even after us, right? So land is going to keep on existing. So if there are any payments exclusively towards land, then you have to classify that as an operating lease. So that's the reason this segregation is becoming necessary for a lessor. Don't worry in the books of the lessee. Lessee is not supposed to classify lease into finance lease, operating lease. Lessee is simply supposed to recognize the ROU asset. But this discussion becomes absolutely necessary as far as a lessor is considered. So, how are we supposed to carry out this segregation? We are having a simple note in our books. The note itself is self-explanatory. I'll just walk you through that particular note. The question that you should really ask yourself is, are the lease payments for land immaterial? For example, let us say there is a 30-story building. Let's say there are 30 floors. And on that 30th floor or any of the floor, there is one small office which we are leasing out. Agreed. As a lessor, you will be charging something for the land also, and of course for the building, that is the part of the building that you have leased out. But don't you feel what you are going to charge over here for land will be immaterial? 30 floors are there in this particular commercial complex. On every floor there are multiple offices. So what has happened over here is that what you will charge for the land will be immaterial. If the payments for the land are immaterial, then this is the treatment that is to be done. We will say land and building will be considered to be a single component. In other words, segregation is not necessary. So we will consider it to be a single component, study the terms of the lease agreement, and on the basis of that decide whether it is finance lease or operating lease. So they are saying classify as finance lease or operating lease based on the terms of the contract. So the useful life of this commercial complex is going to be 40 years, but the lease is only for 10 years. Then I can classify it as an operating lease. Or the lease payments are such that it is substantially covering the fair value of the leased asset. Then I may classify this as a finance lease. So land and building, single component, and it will be classified as finance lease, operating lease as per the terms and conditions of the lease arrangement. But what if the payments towards the land are material? Right, that's where we are putting the answer as no over here. That what if it is material, then what to do? For example, you are leasing out the entire building. Let us say there is a company, the company wants a corporate building. It is engaging a builder that why don't you construct a building and then lease it out to us. So the builder is building the entire complex. The corporate building is ready and is leasing out. This time the payments which will be there towards the lease, a substantial portion of that will be towards the land. So this time the payments towards land are material. So this time segregation should be carried out if possible. So one should find out that what is the fair value of the land and what is the fair value of the building. And in that ratio, we should split the lease payments. So they say land and building components are separated in the ratio of the fair value of each component. We should ask ourselves that is this possible? To be honest, in real life, it will be mostly possible to do this segregation. So they are saying, is this possible? The answer is yes, that yes, we are able to do the separation of the land and the building. Really good. Building component will be now segregated as finance lease or operating lease depending upon the terms of the lease arrangement. While land component, you just see, land component will be compulsorily classified as operating lease. Why? As we had discussed earlier, land has indefinite useful life. So we have constructed a building, we have leased out the entire building. Obviously, this time as a lessor, I will be charging a substantial portion also for the land. So can I calculate the fair value of the land? Can I calculate the fair value of the building? Your answer is yes. Then carry out the segregation into land and building. Building component, analyze the lease arrangement, classify as finance lease or operating lease. Land component, classify as operating lease compulsorily. But what if you are arguing, yes, there's an arrow over here which is missing. What if this segregation of the land and building on the basis of the fair value is not possible? Then what to do? Okay. Is it clear that both the elements are operating lease? Analyze it. Do you feel that both the elements are operating lease? If your answer is yes, then classify the whole lease as an operating lease. Okay. So ask yourself, is it an operating lease? You study the entire agreement, you feel that it seems to be an operating lease. You have constructed this building, you have leased it out to the company, but only for 5 years. Only for 5 years. If the building has been constructed and leased out only for 5 years, it seems to be an operating lease. So since segregation of land and building components is not possible, I will classify the whole lease as an operating lease. But the arrangement of the lease is such that whatever are the expenses which have been incurred on the construction, that is, whatever is the total fair value of the land and building taken together, it will be recovered, right? It will be recovered through the lease payments by the lessor. Then it seems it's not an operating lease. It seems that substantial, all of the risk and rewards incident to ownership are getting transferred to the lessee. I will classify the whole lease as a finance lease.